Let's take a look at how you would answer this question. Our first step is to read the question, which word is a synonym of creating in paragraph 10? Our second step is to circle our keywords, which I've already done. I've circled synonym, creating, and paragraph 10. I circled the word synonym because I need to know that we are looking for a word that means the same thing. I also circled the word creating because this is the word we are trying to find a similar word for. And paragraph 10 is a keyword because it tells us where we can find our keyword. Now that we've done step 1 and 2, we can move on to step 3. And in step 3, we need to go back into the text and find our keywords. Our keywords were synonym, creating, and 10. We have found 10 right here, which means we're in the correct paragraph, and I've also circled our other keyword, creating. The passage already made it super easy for us to find it because it was already underlined. Now that we know we are in the right section of the text, it is time to do step 4. In step 4, we are going to read around the text to help us answer the question. Let's read the sentence where creating is in. Creating embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. Now we know that this question is asking us to find a word that means the same thing as creating. One way to find the right answer is to plug in our words to make sure that it means the same thing. So our answer choice is going to keep the same meaning. Let's take a look. Finding embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. We weren't talking about looking for anything, so I think the word finding is changing our sentence. Let's try making. Making embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. That one sounds about right. We were talking about this isn't the kind of things they do for fun. Making embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. We know that Helmoni and Kwan like to make these cloths together. So making sounds like a good option, but let's check the other ones. Drawing. Drawing embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. Drawing doesn't make sense here because we learned earlier that embroidered is when you get a needle and a thread and you make a design. So we're not actually drawing, and drawing changes the meaning of the sentence. Let's try one more, organizing. Organizing embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. Now, again, organizing seems to work in the sentence, but if we think back to what they were doing, they were making the cloths. They weren't organizing them. And organizing would change our definition, which means making is a synonym of creating. Making and creating mean the same thing. Now let's do this question together. Let's do step 1. What is step 1 of our thinking step? That's right, step 1 is to read the question. Let's read the question together. Why is Kwan seeing Mrs. Gibbs at the grocery store important to this story? Can you tell me what step 2 of our thinking steps is? That's right, in step 2, we are going to circle our keywords. What are some keywords you think we should circle in this question? I think some keywords we should circle in this question are seeing, Mrs. Gibbs, grocery store, and important. I circled seeing because we are trying to find a place in the story where Kwan sees Mrs. Gibbs. I circled Mrs. Gibbs because we are finding her in the section of the story. This is where our answer will be. I also circled the word grocery store because he sees Mrs. Gibbs at different points in the story, but we are trying to find the part of the passage where they're in the grocery store. And I also circled the word important. We need to know why this is important to the story. So this section, when he sees Mrs. Gibbs at the grocery store, why is that important? The only way we'll be able to find out is if we go back into the text and see what happens during this part. So we can move on to step 3 and go into our text. I have already found our keywords in this section of the text. I see grocery store, Mrs. Gibbs, Mrs. Gibbs, Mrs. Gibbs. We are in the right section of our text. So we have done step 3, which means we are now in step 4. And in step 4, we are going to read around our keywords to try to find our answer. Remember, we are trying to find out why this part of the story is important. Try to see what happens in this part of the story. Take a look at this section right here. Kwan, you should bring your cloths to school tomorrow. Your classmates would enjoy seeing them. You have a unique skill. What happens in paragraph 6? In paragraph 6, Mrs. Gibbs tells Kwan that he should take the cloths to school. Now, if you remember what happens in the rest of the story, Kwan is a little bit nervous about showing his cloths. His grandmother tries to calm his nerves and explain why the cloths are important. And at the end of the passage, he ends up showing the cloths to his classmates. Now that we know what happens in paragraph 6, and we have remembered what happens in the rest of the story, let's go back to our question and let's answer it. Why is Kwan seeing Mrs. Gibbs at the grocery store important to this story? Is it A, Mrs. Gibbs gets to meet Harmony, B, Harmony is able to explain what wrapping cloths are, C, it leads to Kwan sharing his talent with his classmates, or D, it allows Kwan's classmates to learn how to carry their lunches in a cloth? In paragraph 6, we learn that Mrs. Gibbs asks Kwan to bring his cloths. If she had not asked Kwan to bring his cloths to school, then the rest of the passage would not have happened. Think about it. If she hadn't asked his cloths to go to school, he wouldn't have been nervous. His grandmother would not have told him the story about why the cloths are so important. He wouldn't have been nervous at school, and he wouldn't have shown the cloths to his classmates. Why is Kwan seeing Mrs. Gibb at the grocery store important to the story? It's important because it leads to Kwan sharing his talents with his classmates.